My name is Rachel. I was 36 years old when my life reached its lowest point. This wasn't the kind of low people talk about openly. There was no dramatic collapse, no single moment where everything went wrong. It was quieter than that. Slower. The kind of low that creeps in day by day until you don't recognize yourself anymore. I was exhausted all the time. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, but the kind that settles into your bones. Getting out of bed felt heavy. Showering felt optional. Smiling felt like work. I was struggling with depression, even though I hated using that word. I told myself I was just overwhelmed, burned out, temporarily lost. My husband, Mark, saw it happening. At first, he tried to be supportive. He brought me tea when I stayed in bed too long. He asked if I wanted to talk. He told me, "This is just a phase. We'll get through it." When I cried without being able to explain why, he held me and said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." I believed him because I needed to. I had always been the strong one in our marriage, the one who held everything together when life got hard. When Mark was stressed about work, I reassured him. When he doubted himself, I reminded him who he was. When things felt uncertain, I was the one saying, "We'll figure it out." So when I became the one who needed help, I didn't demand it. I apologized for it. "I'm sorry I'm not myself," I told him. "I promise I'll get better." I said, "I know this isn't easy for you," I added, as if my pain was something he was generously tolerating. Some days, I barely left the bedroom. I wore the same soft clothes because anything tight made me feel exposed. I stopped wearing makeup because it felt pointless. The mirror became something I avoided, not out of self-hatred, but confusion. Mark noticed the changes. "You used to have so much energy," he said one night, standing in the doorway while I sat on the bed. "I know," I whispered. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. I was in therapy. I was taking medication. I was trying. What I needed wasn't advice or solutions. I needed presence. I needed patience. I needed someone to stay when I wasn't easy to love. Instead, Mark began to drift. He stayed out later. He spent more time on his phone. He said he needed space to clear his head. I told myself this was normal, that everyone needed space, that I was lucky he was still here at all. One night, after I had spent most of the day in bed, he sat beside me and sighed. "I don't know how to help you anymore," he said. Panic rose in my chest. "You don't have to fix me," I said quickly. "Just don't give up on me." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Those words became the thing I held on to when everything else felt unstable. They carried me through the days I couldn't function and the nights my thoughts wouldn't slow down. What I didn't know then was that while I was trying to survive my lowest point, my husband was already learning how to live without me. And the moment I needed him the most was the moment he quietly began to leave. After that conversation, I started measuring myself in apologies. I apologized when I slept too long. I apologized when I forgot things. I apologized when I cried and couldn't explain why. "I'm sorry" became the most common sentence in my marriage. I was sorry for being tired, sorry for being quiet, sorry for not laughing at his jokes the way I used to, sorry for not wanting to go out, sorry for needing rest when he wanted normal. I treated my pain like a flaw I needed to fix quickly before it cost me everything. Mark never asked me to apologize. That was the dangerous part. He didn't have to. His silence did the work for him. When I canceled plans, he didn't argue. He just went without me. When I stayed in bed, he didn't complain. He just closed the door. When I said, "I know I'm hard to deal with right now," he didn't correct me. He nodded. That nod stayed with me. I started pushing myself past what I could handle because I was afraid of becoming a burden. I forced myself to cook dinner even when my hands shook. I went to events I wasn't emotionally ready for and smiled until my face hurt. I told myself that if I could just act normal long enough, maybe things would snap back into place. At night, lying next to him, I replayed the woman I used to be like a highlight reel, the energetic version, the confident one, the wife who didn't need anything. I'll get back there, I whispered into the dark more than once. He rolled over, half asleep, and said, I know, but his voice didn't sound convinced. There were moments I caught him watching me with a look I couldn't name. Not concern, not love, something closer to distance. Like he was already remembering me instead of living with me. One evening, while we were eating dinner in silence, I finally said what had been sitting in my chest for weeks. I hate that I'm like this right now, I said quietly. I know it's not fair to you. He put his fork down and sighed. I didn't say that. I know, I replied quickly. I know I'm not easy. That was the problem. I was already speaking his thoughts out loud for him. Instead of reassuring me, he said, I just miss us. The way things were. I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my throat. Me too. What I didn't say was that I missed me too. I missed the woman who didn't apologize for existing, the woman who believed that love didn't require constant performance, the woman who assumed her husband would stay when things weren't convenient. But I was too afraid to ask for reassurance. I was afraid of what it would mean if he didn't offer it freely. So I kept shrinking. I tried to be quieter, easier, less emotional. I learned how to cry silently in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear. I learned how to say, I'm fine, even when I wasn't, because it made things smoother. He started staying out later around that time. Not dramatically, just an extra hour here, a late meeting there. He said he needed air, space, time to think. I told myself that was reasonable. I told myself I was lucky he was still trying at all. The worst part wasn't that he pulled away. It was that I helped him do it. I framed my suffering as something temporary and inconvenient. I acted like his patience was a favor instead of a baseline expectation. I turned my lowest point into an apology tour. Looking back now, I see how twisted that was. Love isn't tested when things are good. It's tested when one person can't carry their weight for a while and trusts the other to hold the balance. I would have done that for him without hesitation. If he had been sick, I would have stayed. If he had fallen apart, I would have stayed. If he had needed time to rebuild himself, I would have stayed. That's what I thought marriage meant. But somewhere between my apologies and his silence, the ground shifted. He stopped seeing me as someone he wanted to protect and started seeing me as something he had to endure. And I was so focused on becoming better for him that I didn't notice the truth forming right in front of me. I wasn't pushing him away by being broken. I was revealing what he did when love required patience. And while I was apologizing for being at my lowest, he was already finding places where my pain didn't exist. I didn't suspect an affair because I didn't have the energy to imagine one. When you're at your lowest, your world gets very small. You focus on surviving the day, on getting through the hour, on making it to bedtime without falling apart. There wasn't room in my mind for jealousy or suspicion. I was too busy trying to function. Mark's distance felt like another symptom of my failure, not a warning sign. He stayed out later, but I told myself it was because being home felt heavy. I knew I wasn't fun to be around. I knew my sadness changed the atmosphere. If I felt uncomfortable in my own skin, how could I expect him to feel comfortable around me? That was the story I told myself. The first clue didn't come as a shock. It came as confusion. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't snooping. I was sitting on the bed, staring at nothing, trying to gather the strength to get dressed. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, and a message preview that said, I miss you already. I stared at it longer than I should have. My first thought wasn't he's cheating. It was, I'm reading this wrong. I told myself it was a coworker, a friend, someone going through something hard. I put the phone face down and went to the bathroom sink, gripping the edge like the room had tilted slightly. When he came out, wrapped in a towel, I asked casually, "Who's Anna?" He didn't even hesitate. "Work." That was it. No explanation. No curiosity about why I asked. Just a simple answer delivered with confidence. I believed him. Or maybe I needed to. Over the next few weeks, things started to feel off. Not dramatic, just misaligned. He guarded his phone more carefully. He smiled at messages and then looked away when I entered the room. He showered as soon as he got home, like he was washing the day off himself. Still, I blame me. I thought maybe I was imagining things because I was fragile, because depression warps reality, because I wasn't thinking clearly. I told myself I was projecting my fears onto him. The night I found out for sure, I wasn't even looking for proof. He had asked me to email something to his sister from his laptop because mine was dead. I opened the browser, clicked into his email, and there it was, an open thread he hadn't closed properly. No dramatic subject line, just familiarity. Inside were messages that didn't need explanation, plans, inside jokes, compliments that used to be mine, words he hadn't spoken to me in months. "I feel like myself with you. I don't have to be careful around you. You make things easy." I read them slowly, like my brain was buffering. There was no panic, no scream, just a deep, hollow drop in my chest, like the floor had disappeared and I was suspended in midair. So this is where he went, not because I pushed him, not because I was difficult, but because I was vulnerable. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time. My hands were steady. That scared me more than shaking would have. When he came home later, I didn't confront him right away. I watched him move through the house like everything was normal. He asked how my day was. He kissed my forehead. He checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. At some point, I realized something that hurt more than the betrayal itself. He hadn't cheated despite my lowest point. He had cheated during it. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't sound like mine. "I know," I said quietly. He froze. Just for a second. "Know what?" he asked. I saw the messages. He sat down slowly, rubbing his hands together like he was preparing for a difficult conversation at work. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said. That sentence echoed in my head. Not "I'm sorry," not "I hurt you," just logistics. "I didn't want to make things worse for you," he continued. "You were already struggling. I didn't want to add more stress." I stared at him, trying to understand how someone could say that out loud and think it made sense. "So you cheated on me," I said carefully. "To protect me?" He looked at the floor. I was lonely. Lonely. I was drowning, apologizing for taking up space, begging him not to give up on me, and he was lonely. In that moment, something inside me went very still. I realized then that the affair wasn't about attraction or opportunity. It was about escape, about choosing a place where he didn't have to be patient, or kind, or strong. He didn't cheat because I was broken. He cheated because I was no longer convenient. And the woman he broke wasn't weak or unlovable. She was the one who would have stayed forever. When he said it, he sounded almost proud of himself. "I didn't want to make it worse for you." He said it slowly, carefully, like he was choosing the kindest words available, like what he had done was some quiet act of mercy instead of a betrayal. I remember staring at him, trying to understand how a sentence could feel so gentle and so cruel at the same time. "You didn't want to make what worse?" I asked. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "You were already fragile. You were barely holding on. I didn't want to pile more pain on top of that." The room felt very still, like even the air was waiting to see how I would respond. "So you lied," I said. He shook his head. "I protected you." That was when I realized how completely he had rewritten the story in his head. In his version, I wasn't a wife who deserved honesty. I was a problem to manage, a situation to work around, something delicate that needed to be handled quietly while he took care of himself somewhere else. I stayed, I said. My voice surprised me with how steady it was. I stayed even when I could barely get out of bed. I stayed when I hated myself. I stayed when loving me wasn't easy. He looked uncomfortable. That's not fair. No, I replied. What you did wasn't fair. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, talking faster now. I didn't plan this. It just happened. She listened. She didn't look at me like I was walking on eggshells all the time. So you chose easy, I said. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She made me feel normal again, he added quietly. Normal. That word landed harder than anything else he said. Because what he was really saying was that my pain had become inconvenient, that my healing took too long, that love, for him, had conditions he never bothered to say out loud. I thought about all the nights I apologized for crying, all the mornings I forced myself to function so he wouldn't be annoyed, all the times I told myself that if I could just get better faster, we'd be okay. And there he was, explaining that he stepped out because I was struggling too slowly for his comfort. You didn't cheat because you were confused, I said. You cheated because you didn't want to be uncomfortable. He flinched at that. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said again, softer this time. But you did, I replied. And you did it while I was already down. For the first time since the conversation started, his confidence slipped. He looked at me like he was seeing something unfamiliar. I thought you'd understand, he said. That almost made me laugh. Understand what? That when life got hard, he outsourced compassion? That when I needed loyalty the most, he chose secrecy instead? I would have understood if you were struggling, I said. I would have stayed. I would have gone to therapy with you. I would have carried more weight until you could stand again. My voice broke then, just slightly. But you didn't give me that choice. He was quiet. In that silence, something very important became clear to me. Love isn't proven when things are easy. It's proven when someone falls apart and trusts you not to leave. He hadn't failed because he made a mistake. He failed because when I collapsed, he walked around me instead of kneeling beside me. I don't know what you want me to say, he finally muttered. I want you to stop pretending this was about protecting me, I said. This was about protecting yourself. He looked away, and in that moment, the man I had been clinging to, the man I believed would stay no matter what, finally disappeared. What stood in front of me wasn't someone who made a bad choice under pressure. It was someone who revealed exactly who he was when love required patience. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. After that conversation, I didn't cry the way I thought I would. I felt hollow instead, like something essential had been removed, and my body hadn't caught up to the loss yet. I moved through the next few days slowly, carefully, as if I were carrying something fragile inside me that might shatter if I moved too fast. What kept replaying in my mind wasn't the messages or the lies. It was the comparison. He chose a woman who met him where he was comfortable. He walked away from the woman who would have met him where he was broken. That truth hurt more than the affair itself. I started thinking back over our marriage, not in anger, but with a strange clarity. I remembered the year his company downsized and he came home terrified he'd lose his job. I remembered how I stayed up late with him, helping him rewrite his resume, reassuring him over and over that his worth wasn't tied to a paycheck. I remembered when his father got sick and he shut down emotionally, barely speaking for weeks. I cooked. I cleaned. I handled phone calls and logistics without complaint. I let him grieve in his own way and never once thought about leaving. I remembered nights when he was the one who fell apart, when he snapped at me or withdrew or drank too much. And I told myself, this is what love looks like when it's tested. I stayed, not because it was easy, but because I believed in forever. That's what he never understood. I wasn't loyal because things were good. I was loyal because commitment meant something to me even when things were hard, especially when they were hard. Sitting across from him now, knowing what he had done, I realized he had never actually seen that part of me. He had benefited from it, leaned on it, depended on it, but he never truly respected it. I would have stayed, I said quietly one night when the silence between us became unbearable. He looked up from his phone. Stayed through what? Through anything, I answered. Through sickness, through depression, through you falling apart the way I did. He frowned slightly. That's not fair. You don't know what you would have done. I smiled then, a sad, tired smile. I do, because I already did. That was when it hit him. Not all at once, not dramatically, but I saw it in his eyes. The slow realization that the woman sitting in front of him wasn't replaceable in the way he thought she was. The woman he cheated on wasn't just a wife going through a hard season. She was his safest place, and he broke her. I saw guilt surface then. Real guilt. Not defensive explanations or excuses. His voice softened. He started saying things like, I didn't think it would go this far. And I didn't realize what I was risking. That almost hurt more, because it told me he had assumed I would always be there, that my staying power was something he could take for granted, even abuse, without consequence. He didn't lose me because I stopped loving him. He lost me because he never learned how to protect the people who loved him the most. That night, lying alone in bed, I pressed my hand to my chest and felt something unexpected under the pain. Pride. I had loved deeply. I had stayed loyal in circumstances that would have justified leaving. I had shown up fully, even when I was falling apart. There was nothing weak about that. What was weak was choosing comfort over character, escape over responsibility, easy over enduring. For the first time since everything came out, I stopped asking myself what I could have done differently, because the truth was clear now. The woman he betrayed wasn't lacking. She was rare. And the tragedy of it wasn't that he cheated. It was that he destroyed the one person who would have never walked away from him until he gave her no other choice. Something shifted after I understood what he had really lost. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way trust disappears when you finally stop reaching for it. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't demand answers anymore. I stopped asking why because the answer no longer mattered. The truth was already complete. I had been begging to be chosen in a marriage where I was supposed to be the choice. Once I saw that clearly, the begging stopped on its own. He noticed almost immediately. I stopped explaining my feelings in long sentences. I stopped trying to make him understand how deeply he had hurt me. I stopped reminding him of what we had been. Conversations became shorter, calmer, final. You're being distant, he said one evening, standing in the doorway while I folded laundry. I'm being honest, I replied. He didn't like that answer. He started trying then, really trying. He deleted messages. He offered therapy. He apologized in the way people do when they realize something valuable might actually leave. I made a mistake, he said. I'll do anything to fix this, he promised. You know I love you, he added, like love could exist without loyalty. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. And that scared him more than anger ever could. You're not fighting for us, he said one night, frustration bleeding into his voice. I looked at him, tired but steady. I fought when it was my turn to hold us together. You walked away then. He shook his head. That's not fair. No, I said. This is the consequence. That word sat between us, heavy and unavoidable. He wanted reassurance. He wanted hope. He wanted me to tell him we could go back to the way things were. What he didn't understand was that the woman who could do that no longer existed. She had been broken, And she didn't come back. I started focusing on myself, not in a dramatic glow-up way, but in quiet, necessary ways. I slept, I ate, I went to therapy without apologizing for needing it. I took walks without checking my phone. I stopped monitoring his moods. The more I steadied myself, the more frantic he became. He asked where I was going. He asked who I was talking to. He asked if I still loved him. I answered honestly, I don't know, I said, but I know I won't beg to be chosen again. That was when the balance of power finally shifted, not because I wanted control, but because I had reclaimed my dignity. One night, after a long silence, he asked the question he'd been avoiding. Are you leaving me? I thought about it carefully, not out of cruelty, but respect for myself. I'm leaving the version of me who stayed no matter what, I said. What happens next depends on whether you can live with that. He didn't answer, and in that silence, I felt something settle inside me that I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not relief, not victory. Peace. Because the moment I stopped begging to be chosen was the moment I chose myself. And once you do that, there's no going back to the kind of love that only survives when you're easy. Leaving didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened in a series of small, quiet decisions. The kind you make when you finally trust yourself more than the promises that already failed you. I didn't pack a suitcase in a rush. I didn't leave in the middle of the night. I took my time. I spoke to my therapist. I spoke to a lawyer. I told one close friend the truth and listened as she said, very softly, "You didn't deserve that." That sentence stayed with me. The day I told him I was leaving, he didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at the floor like he was trying to rewind time in his head. "So this is it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "But I'm trying now," he said quickly. "I messed up, but I'm here now. Doesn't that count for something?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something I didn't expect. Compassion, not love. "It would have counted," I said. "If you had stayed when I couldn't stand on my own." He swallowed. "I didn't know you'd leave." That was the truth. He never imagined I would. He thought my loyalty was endless, that my empathy was permanent, that my willingness to stay through pain meant I would absorb anything and still remain. What he never understood was that loyalty without safety eventually turns into self-betrayal. I moved out 2 weeks later. The apartment I found wasn't big or perfect, but it was quiet in a way that felt healing. The first night there, I slept all the way through without waking up anxious or apologetic for existing. The silence wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. Healing didn't happen overnight. Some days I still felt the weight of what I lost. Not just the marriage, but the version of myself who believed love meant endurance at any cost. I mourned her. She had loved deeply. She had believed fiercely. She had stayed longer than she should have. But I also honored her, because she showed me what I was capable of giving, and what I should never give to someone who wouldn't protect it. I heard through mutual friends that he struggled after I left, that he was angry, confused, that the woman he cheated with disappeared when real life showed up, that he talked about me like I was something precious he didn't realize he was holding until it slipped through his fingers. I didn't correct the story. I didn't need to. Some losses don't need explanation. They teach on their own. Months later, he reached out. A long message. Apologies mixed with regret. He said he finally understood what he had done, that he had ruined the one thing in his life that was real. I read it once. Then I closed the message and didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity, because the woman who would have stood by him forever was gone, and she didn't owe him a resurrection. I am not fully healed. I am still human. I still have days where sadness sneaks in quietly, but I no longer confuse love with self-abandonment. I no longer apologize for being human. I no longer believe that my lowest moments make me unworthy of loyalty. If anything, they proved how much I deserved it. He didn't break me. He broke the future he could have had with a woman who loved him at his best and stayed through his worst. And I walked away, not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally learned how to love myself enough to leave. If there's one thing I want you to remember from my story, it's this. If someone leaves when you are at your lowest, they don't deserve to meet you at your strongest. And if you are ever made to feel like your pain is too much for the person who promised to carry it with you, believe them, then choose yourself. Because the right kind of love doesn't run when you fall apart. It stays.